It is obvious to anybody who spends any time on watching television that the sports betting industry is growing and growing enormously. The increasing number of sports betting companies, and it looks from the frequency with which they advertise on television that there is growing competition between them, each of them staking out territory and hoping to make that territory larger. And I know that all of my colleagues have spoken about it, and we all feel uncomfortable about it because we know that betting is one of those things that has very dire consequences for some people who bet on sports. I had a conversation probably a year ago now with somebody who's involved in one of the companies, and they acknowledged that, but they said nobody is suggesting that, well, people are suggesting that the alcohol industry, and there are restrictions, considerable restrictions, on how and when and what alcohol advertisements can contain. And there is no cigarette advertising at all. And more people are saying, given that there are dire consequences for people who don't gamble harmlessly, and given that sports betting is becoming an increasingly prominent part of gambling, do we need to look at this? Australia is one of a growing number of countries that is looking to regulate these sorts of things. Jonathan Cherry, founder of Cherryflava Media, has recently written about this issue. Jonathan, good afternoon.
Afternoon, John.
And your research, which well done to you for having done, it really is growing and growing dramatically. It's huge.
Yeah, I was incredibly surprised. I went and had a look at the National Gambling Board of South Africa's annual report, as you do, and I just had a look at what the volume of betting is in South Africa. And last year, so the betting year ended on the 31st of March, they recorded 1.1 trillion rands worth of betting going through South Africa. And the vast majority of that is the online sports betting category. And that's a 40% increase from the year before. And as you said, considering the amount of advertising and promotion that's been currently done specifically for sports betting, you can assume that that number will once again go up by at least 40% in next year. So this is an enormous industry, and I was absolutely gobsmacked at that number. Because if you consider that our GDP number is about 4.6 trillion, this is a 1 trillion rands worth of betting is going through the gambling books in this country. And I must be honest, I'm not quite sure whether that's recorded in the GDP numbers, because that's absolutely staggering. So yeah, it's an absolutely enormous industry, and I was completely surprised.
Is there any information about who's gambling and how much, if there is such a thing as the sort of average gambler? I mean, is this something that people are, George, you bet on sporting results. What would you spend in a month? 250 rand. So are most gamblers like George, 250 rand a month? Very occasionally he wins, mostly he loses, are making that judgment, yeah. Is there any information about whether people are a lot like George, or that there are a lot more people spending a lot more money than George's 250 rand a month?
Yeah, I couldn't find anything locally, John, but research that was done in the United States tends to suggest that about 5% of the gamblers probably account for about 70% of the volume. So, that's the normal ratio that I suppose you would assume. There's going to be a top set of whales that do a lot of the gambling. And the Act in 2004 brought about the legalization of sports betting. Before, you could bet on horses for sure. But in 2004, that was opened up where the bookmakers could then take bets or wagers specifically on sporting events outside of horse racing. But what's very interesting is that since COVID, there's been an absolutely astronomical increase in the amount of online sports betting. And that's really a combination between the fact that e-commerce in general in South Africa has really picked up, and the kind of app technology and just the gamification of the sports betting has gotten far more sophisticated in the last couple of years. So there's been an interesting development there, and I think what that's really inspired is that people who used to have sort of a pool at work, where you'd put a couple of bucks down on Springboks winning over the weekend, that has now probably been made more sophisticated through the accessibility for online sports betting. So what might have started off as a pretty innocent thing has kind of migrated into a much bigger industry. But let's not fool ourselves. Sports betting has been going on in this country for a very long time. It's just that now we're able to actually monitor these things. And I know the DA has actually got a proposal out where they're trying to legalize online gambling. So online gambling, casino-type games in South Africa, it's still illegal to do that here. But the DA wants to regulate that and also bring that into the fold so that they can capture a little bit of tax revenue on online gambling. So it doesn't stop here. There's a whole new category that can be added into the mix here as well.
Jonathan Cherry, founder of Cherryflava Media, thank you very much. Didn't have time to go into some of the other issues about what do you do about this. You just accept it and take the tax. You can't ban it. We learned during COVID that if you ban something like smoking cigarettes, the consequences are considerably worse than if you'd allowed people to continue smoking. The penetration of the illegal cigarette industry into the smoking world in South Africa would probably not have been accelerated the way it was. So you can't ban sports betting. Do you ban, or how do you restrict? There is some evidence that not allowing cigarette advertising at all has impacted on the number of people who smoke. But a lot of those have now gone to vaping. I'm looking at you. Yes, I am, Alexis. And so what does one do? Shrug your shoulders and talk about it on the radio, and that's it?